Welcome back, Chappelle. All right. Look at that. Look at this gross thing. Looks like he's eating his kid. All right, so look. This is, of course, Ivan the Grozny, right? This is Ivan the Terrible. We discussed in class how he is going to create a Russian absolute state. We talked about how he killed his son, cut somebody's tongue out, burned some guy's eyes out. We also discussed how most of those stories probably are made up by the boyars because they wanted him to seem so bad because he was the one that actually stripped power away from them, right? Remember, your Russian nobles are called boyars, right? Now, not like Chef Boyardee, but boyars, right? Now, his dynasty, we also discussed, is going to die out in 1613 after poor Fedor.
Aww.
I know. So poor little Fedor does his thing, does his best, but Fedor the First, of course, does not rule efficiently, and it leads to this thing called the Time of Troubles, right? The Time of Troubles is actually when the Polish-Lithuanian government came in and invaded Moscow and took it over. Now, the big thing, though, about all this is that Ivan has successfully created a platform for an absolutist to step in and become a true absolute authority, right? But the unfortunate thing was that his family died out, right? The first true Russian absolutist is not going to really be Ivan. It's actually going to be this guy. And this guy's name is Peter the Great, all right? That's right, Peter Romanov. Peter the Great becomes what you would consider the first Russian absolutist, right? So Peter the Great ruled over Russia in a very unique way, right? So in a very, very unique way. Well, first of all, let's take a gander at him real quick. What's weird about Peter out the gate? He doesn't look very Russian, all right? So, he doesn't look very Russian, right? So if you're looking at Ivan, right, when we looked at Ivan the Fourth, a.k.a. Ivan the Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, right, with his Oprichniki and his Oprichnina, all right? Now, so if you look at him, that's what you imagine as stereotypical Russian. But this is what Peter looks like. Peter is very different, all right? So Peter, one, you could spot him anywhere. He was 6'8", all right? He's a massive dude. He also, however, though, had really small hands, really small hands, really small feet. Had visual facial tics, he would actually have a tic of a certain type. And he also was a very somewhat kind of kind leader early on, right? But his biggest idea to create a Russian state with absolute authority and economic dominance was he believed that it needed to become Western, right? So Peter the Great took a journey to the West, right? And it's known as, jot this down right over top of modernized Russia, right here, okay? You should write this right here. He called it his Grand Tour, right? And so Peter the Great, when he comes to power, he's actually a very young boy when he comes to power. He's only, I think, 7 or 8. And he actually has to rule in junction with his brother, right? And his brother's name is Ivan V, right? So he actually has to rule along with him. His mom actually really ruled for the both of them. She actually cut a hole out in this throne where they both sat, and she would speak to him from behind the throne so nobody could actually see her because women in Russia were not allowed to be seen. So after Ivan dies, though, Peter becomes the sole ruler of Russia, right? And he believes that the biggest thing holding Russia back is it's not technologically advanced and it's not modern Western, right? So let's do a really quick thing and let's double check on the years that he was actually in charge, right? So Peter the Great, right? Peter the Great, all right? So Peter the Great of Russia, he's also known as former emperor of all Russia, was born, his reign is going to go from 1682, okay, until his death in 1725, okay? So he's actually in charge of in charge of Russia while Louis is ruling over France because Louis died in 1715 and Peter the Great's going to die in 1725, right? Now, really, really big thing, though, okay, is Peter the Great sets out on this tour to figure out how to modernize Russia. He goes to Holland to learn how to build ships, which is the Netherlands, okay? So he goes to the Netherlands to build ships. He goes to England to learn economics and government practices. He goes to France to learn diplomacy, right? He goes to France to figure out how to discuss things in a fashion of a government that is a Western government, right? Now, unfortunately, he has to leave his tour early, but he does come back with all these new ideas, right? And when he has these new ideas, he develops the Russian Navy, and he makes Russia into an important European state, right? He then also leads several wars. wars, after he's learned modern military tactics from other Western Europeans, he actually brings a lot of things back with him. He brings cannons and artillery guns back with him. He brings back the ideas of a modern uniform for a military, right? This is going to become the Russian military uniform. He brings back the ideas of navigation, and he sets his sight on something very important. And I need you to jot these two things down, okay? You ready? The results of his grand tour are going to be, one, he wants to create a Western culture in Russia. Jot that down. A Western culture in Russia. And second, he wants a warm water port, right? He wants a port city where he can bring goods in, where the ice is not going to freeze over seasonally, and he will be able to ship things in and out all the time, right? So he wants a Western culture in Russia. He wants to stop being all Eastern, and he wants a warm water port, okay? Make sure you have both those things written down. It is a fill-in-the-blank question. What did he want to change, right? So the big thing, though, going forward is you have to understand, first of all, he changes his military dramatically. And these are all the cultural changes, right? This is the Western culture he creates there. He creates a standing army of 210,000, a massive professional army equipped with a Russian naval fleet, right? He takes that thing and he actually fights off the Swedes and invades Finland against this kid named Charles X, I think, or Charles XI or the 9th. He's Charles the something of Finland. He's like 15 when he fights him and loses the first time, but then he comes back later on, fights him and beats him. But cultural changes that he brings to Russia are huge. He writes a book on Russian manners, right? He makes it so that basically he's introducing Western European concepts to manners, right? He forces men who are coming into cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg, which we'll talk about here in a second, his warm water city. He makes them shave their beards. Or if they want to keep it, they have to pay a tax, right? There's actually coins that you can see from men having to pay their Russian beard tax. Okay, so if you wanted to keep your beard, you actually had to pay. And this little coin that you were given, you could show to people that you had actually paid your beard tax, right? So that is the Russian beard tax. That's how you showed people that, look, I kept it, look, I paid for my beard, right? Or there would be people at the front gates of Moscow with razors and like hot cloths to shave your beard off if you couldn't pay it. There's so much propaganda on it, right? Look at them shaving people's beards off because it was like the Westerners out in France and England, they do not wear beards. They do the pleasant mustache, right? So now look, he also brought more rights to women, which is a very big thing as well. He makes it so women do not have to walk around with veils over their face, right? Which was an old Mongolian custom, right? So he makes it so women can be seen visibly in Russian society. He also forces anyone who's going to talk to him about politics, they have to speak to him in French, because that is the national language of the government, because France was the most highly populated country at the time. And also, if you wanted to be able to talk diplomacy, you had to be able to speak French, right? So, like, he made his, like, you want to talk to me about politics? Parlez-vous français, right? So, like, yeah, he forced them to do this, right? And then here's his second thing, right? A second big thing is he wants to create that warm water port, right? And that port city is going to be known as St. Petersburg, right? So after defeating Finland in a very large war using his very, very new Western military that he adopted these ideas after his grand tour, he creates a city known as St. Petersburg, right? And now, ironically enough, people are like, did he name it after himself? He technically didn't. He technically named it after St. Peter, as in the St. Peter. But a lot of people believe he did that just so he could call it after himself, but by also at the same exact time naming it after a saint that he shares the same name with and who he is named after, right? So, and this thing was his warm water port. Jot that down. It's his warm water port. It's the window to the west as well. And he actually moves the capital of Russia from Moscow to St. Petersburg because he's like, this is our new Western city, okay? And it brings new goods, new ideas, and cultural diffusion to Russia. And this is what it looks like to this day, okay? And that right there, that looks like a Western city. It looks like something you would see on the banks of the Danube, in Vienna, in Berlin, in Paris, right? This is a Western-looking city, okay? So the big thing, though, also he builds this, which is the Winter Palace, right? The Winter Palace, which becomes his home. It's the building that tries to rival the Palace of Versailles, right? He builds his own version of Versailles in this new capital city known as St. Petersburg, his warm water port, right? And so he ruled very efficiently. He did have some negatives. Apparently there's a torture chamber in the bottom of this palace, and he killed his son down there because he thought he was trying to take power from him. We won't get into that right now. He had a lot of big uprisings quelled and stuff like that against him. So he wasn't a perfect ruler, but it's important to know that he brings Russia to European cultural dominance, right? He brings them in as a very large, very intense empire that now is looked at as being European rather than being Asiatic, right? So that is it. I hope you all have a great weekend. Start studying now. Test on Monday for B and C period. Test on Tuesday for G. I'll see y'all then. Have a great one.